Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Todd Cherches. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks for having me.
Grace Under Pressure is a show that poses questions to thinkers and doers like Todd about how we can make life better. Grace Under Pressure focuses on what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment that we exert for others. And when you're in tough times, as we are right now, Grace Under Pressure is a leader's ability to keep it together and work for the benefit of others and doing it well. So welcome, Todd. It's an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, John. I appreciate it.
And I will tell you that Todd is a quintessential New Yorker and has a background in television and comedy, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. And they even have called him the Seinfeld of leadership. I love it. Anyway, Todd has a real job. He's the CEO, contributor, and co-founder of Big Blue Gumball.
It is a mouthful.
Excuse me. It's a mouthful. Big Blue Gumball, a New York City-based consulting firm specializing in leadership development, public speaking, and coaching. Todd's also a three-time award-winning adjunct professor, where we cross paths at New York, NYU, and he teaches a course called Human Capital Management, and he has an extraordinary group of students. He also teaches at Columbia. Todd started his career in advertising for Ogilvy Mather, an agency that has a soft spot in my heart because I have written about Shelley Lazarus. And he spent 10 years working in Hollywood for Michael Nesmith, the Monkees, Aaron Spelling, you name it, Disney even. Okay. Todd's also a TEDx speaker and the author of a brand new book called Visual Leadership. Right there you have it. Okay. Welcome, Todd. So
thank you, John. Thank you.
Good. Todd, I always start off asking people the tough questions. So, what are your students telling you about how they're coping? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's tough out there. I mean, we're still in the pandemic situation, and people are feeling isolated. In the spring of 2020, my class, which is 14 sessions, we were in person for 7 weeks, and all of a sudden, boom, the pandemic hit, and we instantly overnight became an online class. So I immediately had to learn how to use Zoom and breakout rooms and whiteboards and chat and figure out how to replicate the in-person experience online. So it was emotionally difficult. It was physically difficult. So, we made it work. And I just finished my fall semester class, which went great. And you were a guest speaker there. So speaking about grace and leadership. So thank you for that. But it's tough. It's tough for all of us, managers, parents, employees, students, and teachers to find a way to connect with each other and support each other and navigate this crisis that we're all going through.
Well, great. I'm fascinated when I first saw your book came out, Visual Leadership, because I have some, as I told you, I have photography in my background and even some filmmaking. So, and now I work in leadership development. So it seemed a natural to have you on. So what the heck is visual leadership? So.
Visual leadership is basically the application of visual thinking and visual communication to the world of management and leadership. So little Venn diagram here. So it's basically where visual thinking and leadership meet, right? So visual thinking is basically about thinking in pictures. It's about using diagrams and PowerPoint slides and physical props and items, just any information you can take in through the physical eye. Leadership, we all know what leadership is about, but very few people are putting the two together. If you think about leadership, how often do people say, so-and-so is a visionary leader, or what is your leadership vision, right? It's all about seeing. So the metaphor of seeing, noticing, looking, watching, perceiving, those are all metaphors and themes that I talk about in visual leadership. And we can talk about the different types, but that's basically what it's all about. And the reason it's one single word is because who you are and how you lead is inseparable from the lens through which you see the world. So that's the foundational principle that I start out with.
I like that. What got you to think about pictures versus words? Because we're a word-driven society, and less so with pictures. So what motivated you to be thinking that way?
Yeah, it's not just pictures, visual imagery, but it's also visual language. And what's interesting is most of my students and people I meet say, "Oh, you must have an MBA." but my bachelor's degree is in English literature. I majored in English literature with a concentration in Shakespeare and poetry. So, and I grew up as a baby boomer TV addict. I talk about it in my TED Talk about how when people say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say, I want to be Superman. And then, no, you need a backup plan. Well, if that doesn't work out, all right, Batman. So it's like, that was my perception of, and then I ended up working in television. So it was like, that's how it evolved as I matured, and I realized that the Superman and Batman jobs were taken. So, but between television and literature, it's all about storytelling. It's about character. It's about imagery. It's about metaphor. It's about painting a picture with words. It's about, and one of my themes is, how do you get people to see what you're saying, right? And isn't that the foundation of leadership, right? Getting a vision out of your head and into someone else's in a clear and compelling and inspiring way, because otherwise, how do you create followership? How do you inspire people to make that vision a reality? So that's kind of some of the foundational, that's my origin story, basically.
Great. No, I love it. It's a great way, and it expands our thinking, not just about leadership, but life and how we express ourselves. So I'd like to invite you to read a passage from the book, if you would, please. So.
Sure. I mean, I always say the hardest part of any decision is not what to put in, but what to leave out. So it was kind of just like the iceberg is one of my favorite metaphors, right? Like, you have that tip of the iceberg, but there's so much more beneath the surface. So out of the whole book, I just picked a small passage. We just got a puppy 2 months ago, little Lucy, who's 4 months old. And I want to tell this story, chapter 36 of my book, which I call Yellow Ball Leadership, in tribute to my dog growing up, who I'll call Coco, although that's not her real name. It was changed to preserve her anonymity, as I. So here's my brief story. So when I was a little kid and I grew up on Queens on Long Island, I would impress guests with how smart my dog Coco was. I would hold up 3 rubber balls, all the same size, a red one, a blue one, and a yellow one, and I'd throw them across the room or all the way across the backyard, telling her which one to bring back. I'd say, all right, Coco, go bring back the yellow ball. And she would bring back the yellow ball, and people would be amazed at how smart she was and how well I trained her. Well, the bottom line was, she always brought back the yellow ball. It didn't matter what I said, she always brought back the yellow ball. So the truth was, what was going on here? Why did she bring back the yellow ball? Simply because that's what she wanted to do, right? So the first ever management consultant, Frederick W. Taylor, wrote in 1911 that people do best what they like best to do. And apparently that applies to dogs as well as people. So whatever it is, go out there and get that yellow ball. But also we need to find out from people what their yellow ball is. By finding out what motivates people, what makes them tick. I have a model called the Passion Skill Matrix, where it's about what do you love to do and what are you good or great at. And when the two are in sync, that's when you're in that state of flow, and that's where that's the sweet spot. So that's the overall leadership.
I understand that, and as you were reading that, as you were quoting Frederick Douglass Taylor, I was thinking about that quote that many have said, but is most often attributed to Eisenhower: is leadership is the art of getting people to do what they don't want to do. And so it's okay if I'm in the flow, Todd, but how do you keep my flow going if you're my boss? So
yeah. Well, that's the challenge, is finding out what people like to do and what they don't like to do, and try to set. We always talk about my colleague and co-teacher at NYU, who you met, Jeff Schwartzman. One of his sayings that we always say to our students is, our job is to set you up for success. And I always talk about 2 R's, R&R, which is not rest and relaxation, that comes afterwards, but it's resources and roadblocks. Your job as a leader/manager is to give people the resources they need, whether it's human resources, financial, technological, training, and remove the roadblocks that stand in their way, right?
Right.
So if you set your people up for success, they're going to be more successful. So that's part of the foundation of, whether it's a puppy or a child or a student or an employee, how do we set them up for success? By finding out what makes them tick, what keeps them up at night, what gets them out of bed in the morning, all of those kinds of things. What are your motivators? Those are some of the things that we need to think about as leaders.
Right. Our world has been turned upside down. And your book is, I like the way you're expanding our horizons to get us to think visually, which is, so how are you seeing the connection to our crisis? What application might we have to that, Todd?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things going on right now. There's the pandemic, there's social injustice, there's the economic crisis. I think a big part of it is I call it flipping the eye. Can we flip on the cover of my book, there's a rainbow colored eye, right? The rainbow there's no one in the world who has this color eye, right? That represents the fact that no one in the world sees the world the same way that you do, right? So just as no one else has that eye. So what we need to do is look at the world through the lens of other people with empathy and compassion and understanding, realize that we are going through and what they are going through, we're all experiencing things from a different perspective. Also, the rainbow eye represents the colors of the rainbow, innovation and creativity. We need to be innovative and creative in terms of finding solutions. And we also have to flip the eye and turn it on ourselves and look at ourselves in the mirror and question our belief systems, our biases, our assumptions, and say, hey, maybe we're not seeing things as clearly as possible. Let's switch glasses, John, and I'll look at things from your lens and you'll look at things through mine. And then together, let's look at the world in a fresh new way. So those are just some of the concepts. And again, the metaphor of seeing is such a powerful one.
No, I like that. There's two concepts I want to pick up on. One was you talked about the empathy, which of course gets into the category of grace. And for a leader, it's not enough to feel what you're doing. As if I'm your leader, Todd, and you're going through a crisis, I need to act on that. Yeah. How can I help you? And perhaps this, shift in vision makes me more aware of you. Would you agree? So.
Yeah. One of my friends and colleagues, she teaches at the NYU's Silver School of Social Work, Linda Lozelle Bryant, Dr. Linda Lozelle Bryant. We were once talking about empathy and compassion, and she over lunch, and she just blurted out to me, empathy, compassion is empathy in action. And I love that phrase. That kind of just verifies what you're just saying. It's one thing to feel something. It's nothing to do something about it to help relieve someone else's suffering or to make their lives better, right? And that's, again, a big part of grace as a leader.
And the other part of what you just described, and when you were going through visual leadership, is the self. And we enter the world of bias, and you had touched on it. One of the things that our world is suffering from right now, and it's brought to the fore, is the social injustice, racial inequity in all segments of our life. And bias is, and it's always fascinating because we think that I take myself. So I'm, quote, an enlightened person, but I have my biases.
Yeah.
And unless I confront them. So how can that lens help me see myself more clearly? So.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of the work of Joel Barker, who wrote a book called Paradigms many years ago. So a lot of the examples are obsolete, but the principles are timeless. It literally is our paradigm is, again, the lens through which we see the world. And if we say our friend Dr. Gail Hayes, who sadly just passed away yesterday, who's African American, she said, when people say to her, I don't see color, then she said, then you don't see me. And she left that legacy and she opened my eyes to that. It's like, that's part of who we are. And to be blind to it, which is a visual metaphor, we're not seeing that person and their experiences and everything else. So it's so true. Like to say I'm not biased, I don't have prejudices, is to deny reality. We all do. It's once you have awareness of it, then you can do something about it. Then you could say with empathy and compassion, how can I see things? Teach me. Let me listen. Listening, we haven't talked about yet. It's such an important part of grace and being an effective leader is listening to people with empathy and compassion.
Yeah, power. Now, visual leadership has one L. What's the story behind that?
Well, one, it's a brand. I applied for a U.S. service mark, and it was rejected twice. The third time they approved it, so it is now officially my brand, my trademark. But the idea behind that joined L is the fact that, as I said before, that your vision and how you lead is inseparable. So that joined capital L kind of reminds us of that. It's like you literally cannot rip them apart. You can't separate. So that just kind of reinforces that, in addition to just being a branded word that represents what I do and how I do it.
It's interesting. No, and I like it. I think when we loop it into vision, leaders, that's what leaders do. They make the vision come real. Correct? So.
Yeah. And the big part of being a visual leader is not just helping to making your vision a reality, but how do you help others make their visions a reality? Because again, leadership is not about you, it's about the other, right? And in your book, I was just skimming through it again. I love, you talk about better. How do you help people be better? And it reminded me, my father, it's amazing how things pop into your head. My father wrote in my high school graduation album, good, better, best, never let it rest till the good gets better and the better is best. And that's something that his father wrote in his graduation book. And it rhymes, but it's true. It's like we're always striving to be the best, but just work on being better. Yeah,
Right.
Is a step in that direction.
Well, my idea of better comes from the idea, it's borrowed from our ideas of, New Year's resolutions, which if I'm an example, they don't last. but here's the thing. Rather than be prescriptive about it, focus on better. And then the magical part, Todd, is, and I think this gets into your creative aspect, you define better what it means for you.
Yeah. And
a better friend, a better colleague, and all that. So you touched on the rainbow aspect of your logo, the eye, that we saw, but you also touched on, this is what I, quote, expected from the book, and it's there, the innovation and the creativity. So often leaders will go, well, okay, I'm not a creative person. So what do you say to them, Todd?
Yeah, well, first thing, we're all creative, but in different ways, right? There's creative accounting, which not the type we're talking about. Right?
And there are people in jail who can prove that.
Exactly. But I break it down. Instead of saying I'm creative or I'm not, you can say I'm creative in certain areas. You can be creative in sports. I know you're a golfer. You can be creative in a music.
Oh, I'm very creative in the golf course because I'm always in trouble. Anyway.
But I break it down to 4 ways of thinking and communicating more visually. So category 1 is using visual imagery and or drawing. So whether it's a PowerPoint slide or a picture or an object, like I was just talking the other day about, I was saying to someone, ABC, always be curious. But when you think about the word curious, remember Curious George, right? Yes. This is a reminder to me every day to be curious, to always ask why, and to really dive in, right? Always be flexible. I have my Gumby right here, right? So these are not, I didn't draw anything. These are not a slide, but it's a physical, tangible reminder of an intangible concept. So category 1 is using visual imagery and or drawing. I just had my first piece published in Inc. magazine called Can You Draw What Your Company Does? And it's based on an exercise I do with my clients where they have to get up in a flip chart and actually draw and explain in a picture, regardless of how bad they could draw, what they do and how they do it and why they're better than the competition. And then they have to explain it, and it becomes an amazing exercise. So if you just Google, can you draw what your company does in ink, you'll find that article. So
that's a great idea. I like that. Yeah.
Thank you. So category 1 is imagery and drawing. Category 2 is using mental models and frameworks. So whether it's an organizational chart or Maslow's hierarchy of needs or a SWOT analysis or time management matrix, when we put something in a box, we can see it more clearly because life and work are messy and complex. So we can simplify complexity by putting things into categories and boxes. We see them more clearly, and then we can see solutions more clearly. So that's category 2. Category 3 is using metaphor and analogy, explaining something else. Like I use the baseball analogies or Seinfeld references. I know we're both Seinfeld fans. And category 4 is using storytelling and with bonus points for humor if and when appropriate. So those are my 4 different categories. So if someone says, I can't draw, but maybe you could tell a story. Or maybe you're good at using metaphors and analogies. So the first 2 are about visibility through the physical eye, when you talk about models and pictures. The other 2 are visual in their auditory and their visuality, because you can just use your mouth and ear in using metaphors, analogies, and telling stories. So those are my 4 categories of being creative and innovative and how you become a visual leader.
Okay, I'm gonna. I love that description, and now I'm going to throw you a curveball here.
All right.
I am somebody who believes in the mental models, and I like putting things in boxes and processes and all of that. But when we do that, Todd, are we constricting our thinking? Are we thinking inside the box instead of outside the box? So,
well, thinking outside the box has become a cliche, and for good reason, but we can't think outside the box until we have something in the box. So I'm not sure about putting people in boxes, like labeling them like you're this or you're that. I'm talking about, and one of the metaphors I use to explain it, and I'm going to be doing my next TEDx talk this year, whenever the pandemic's over, and it's on the magic of mental models. Let's say you needed to do a table setting for 8 people, right? You open up the silverware drawer and all the silverware was just thrown in there randomly from last time. How long is that going to take versus you open up the next drawer and everything's in compartments, knives, forks, spoons of various sizes, right? Which one is going to be quicker? So if you put things into categories, you'll see them more clearly and you'll come up with solutions. Now, sometimes you do want to take the silverware and dump them out and start all over again, right? But I think that's the key thing is And if you don't like the model, then create a new one. There's that famous quote from Buckminster Fuller: "You change reality by changing the model." Right. So that's how we respond to that. It's not about boxing people in. It's about trying to see things more clearly.
Interesting. I was prompted by another metaphor, and I thought the quote came from Miles Davis. We're talking music, but it actually came from Mozart. And Mozart said the music comes from between the notes, not the notes. So it's that. And I often think that when we talk about connections and models, it's often what happens peripherally around it, the space around it. Do you have a reflection on that, Todd? So
yeah, I love that idea of the space between the notes. Without the spaces, you just have noise, right? So you need those spaces, just like you need spaces in between letters in order to read something, and that's why we have punctuation. So yeah, that negative space, that white space is so important. With PowerPoint slides, if you pack a million things into a slide, you just have clutter. You need to simplify. And I think it was Da Vinci who said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, right? So there's an art and a science to doing it well and doing it effectively, that less is more approach. But I think that's what we're all trying to do, is simplify things. And that brings us to the, VUCA. I wrote a blog post I know you read on, the VUCA world. I wrote, like George Costanza in Seinfeld, leaders need to do the opposite, right? So what's the opposite of VUCA? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The opposite is making things calm, certain, simple, and clear. Right. So as a leader, if you can help to simplify complexity, you can make things more manageable. And I think we need that now, especially like you said, in the pandemic crisis, world that we're living in right now. We need to find a way to make things more manageable. Otherwise, we're just overwhelmed with stress and worry.
No, I call it we are in an ambiguous world, and people hate ambiguity because it's uncertainty. And so it always falls to the leader to create that. And so that's what you're talking about. I call it about squaring the circle, dealing with what you can deal with and focus, and it becomes more of a task so that you can tackle that in the broader picture, one thing at a time.
Yeah, otherwise you just get paralyzed because it's so overwhelming. It's like, how do you strip something down to its essence without losing the nuance and subtlety? But again, we need to function. I think you hit on the head with the word, uncertainty. I'm a planner. I'm a strategic thinker. I have a little bit of OCD, more than a little bit, if I'm being totally honest. So, one of my visual tricks that I use every single day, I have my electronic calendar, but the night before I go to sleep, on a blue index card, there you are right here. So I write down on the blue index card what time I'm waking up. And I was watching Dory Clark's live at noon today, and I had lunch, and then here's the rest of my day. So here's a visual. So the physical act of writing this out every night before I go to sleep puts it visually in my mind's eye, so I could actually envision what my day is going to look like. Now, it doesn't always go exactly like that.
Sure.
But the point is, it makes me feel when I get up in the morning, I can envision how my day is going to potentially unfold.
Great. Now, I have a confession to make to you, Todd, because I write and you write, but you can't tell anybody this. I love metaphors, okay, obviously, but I struggle to find them. You don't tell anybody. Do you have any tips on how to come up with better metaphors? So
yeah, metaphors are hiding in plain sight, which is a metaphor, or we use metaphors so often that we don't even realize it. So I think one way is, the tip of the iceberg. That is, that idea came out of left field. We use baseball analogies all the time.
Sure.
I would say, look to nature, look to the universe, right? Here, I'm looking out the window at a tree, right? The tree reminds me we need to plant the seeds for ideas. We need to go out on a limb because that's where the fruit is. We need to branch out in different directions. I'm looking at the skies, and if you do, the sky's the limit. So I just used like 5 nature metaphors in 60 seconds. So they're all around us. So that's what I'm saying. Look around your environment. What resonates with you? I was just talking to someone the other day who's the head of the American Golf Association, and we were talking about golf metaphors. Now that's a hole in one, or that's an ace in the hole, or that's the chip shot, or that's in the sand trap, right?
Yeah.
Use metaphors that use the Miles Davis analogy, because I know you're a big music person and great piano player, right? So
I play piano.
Two things. One is use the metaphors that resonate with you, but also more importantly is use metaphors that resonate with your audience, right? Because if I'm talking to someone from outside the US, a baseball analogy is not going to resonate with them the way soccer, football. They get very offended when you call it soccer over in the UK. I've been admonished about that. But if I'm talking to someone from India, I may use a cricket analogy, or someone from Australia, a rugby analogy. So we need to speak the language of our stakeholders if we want our metaphors to resonate with them.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you. So that, we're coming to the end of our show, and I always ask every guest, tell me a story of grace. What story do you have, Todd?
Yeah, I have so many stories, but I never frame them in the context of grace until you made me aware through your book of the concept. So one of the stories I tell in my book, and I'm not going to reveal yet who this is about, I was 24 years old. My dream, as I mentioned, was to work in television. I packed my bags and my cape to fly out to Hollywood. So my parents dropped me off at JFK Airport after a teary farewell. I'm walking through first class to get to my coach seat in the very back of the plane. My dream was to work in television for NBC. At that time in the 1980s, it was The Cosby Show and Family Ties and Cheers. A gentleman is blocking the aisle, and who is it? It's Grant Tinker, the CEO and president of NBC and former spouse of Mary Tyler Moore, who I loved growing up. So I almost froze like deer in the headlights, and I went to the back. So here I am, thinking my dream was to work for NBC. I'm on a plane for the next 5 hours with the CEO of NBC, who I idolize. The whole time, even though I talk loud and fast, because I'm from New York, I'm an extreme introvert. I always say I'm a 3 Bs guy, a back of the room, behind the scenes bookworm. Yeah. So for me to have the courage and confidence to go up and talk to him was like not a possibility until we were just about flying over Vegas. And Vegas made me think about gambling and risks and taking chances. And I said, if I don't do it now, I'm going to kick myself and regret it like I regretted so many other things. So I kept going up to that curtain of first class. I finally pushed my way through, sitting in the aisle seat. I said, excuse me, Mr. Tinker, I interned at NBC at 30 Rock last summer. My dream was to work for NBC. I'm moving out to LA. Do you have any advice for me? And he literally, this is what he did. He didn't punch me. He got up from his aisle seat, moved over to the window seat and said, what's your name? Sit down. And he spent the next 10 minutes talking to me, and he ordered me a drink. What would you like? Diet Coke. And so here's the CEO of NBC moving over a seat and spending 10 minutes. And he gave me his card and said, I probably won't have time to talk to you, but call my secretary and see if she can set up some meetings for you. Just tell her I told you to do that. So talk about grace, right? I mean, there's so many lessons in that story, but my pushing myself out of my comfort zone was for me. But what does that say to you about the grace of a leader to do something like that?
What an act of kindness. I mean, I imagine that kind of thing happened to him with regularity. And instead of blowing you off, he, engaged you in conversation. And more than that, did anything come of those conversations?
I got a number of interviews, and just having those interviews, started the ball rolling. I ended up getting a job at Disney and CBS, but those meetings gave me the confidence to say I could do this. I made the right choice. So he literally inspired me, even though I never saw him again after that. Here, a 24-year-old kid sitting in first class on a plane, and Tinker, and it's like, I'm talking about how many years later. I mean, I don't give away my age, but it's at least 25 years later, and it's fresh, that memory. So Dale Carnegie once said, the things we say and do to someone, we may forget 2 minutes later, but we'll stay with that other person for the rest of their lives. That has stayed with me for the rest of my life. And that to me was an act of grace.
Absolutely. And that's such a good reminder. And I know I know that you pass that along, Todd, because I know that you engage with your students and you connect with them in an honest and genuine way. So you live a life of grace, my friend. So
I tried to.
Thank you. So time has been flying. Todd, how can we find you?
Sure. The best way to find me is my brand new website just launched. Even though I have bigbluegumball.com as my company site, toddcherches.com just launched a couple of months ago. So that's where you can sign up for my newsletter.
We will put that in the notes.
Okay, and it's CHER, because so many people spell it with a U. But toddcherches.com, you can sign up for my newsletter and get my list of top 52 visual leadership related books and watch my TED Talk, all on my site. Also, connect with me on LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn, as I know. And then check out my book on Amazon. And if you enjoy it, just reach out to me. I love hearing what people's favorite stories are.
Well, it is a very good book, and I like it. And so thank you. Todd, you've been gracious enough to come on the show today, and I say thank you. And till next time.